We're gonna try to split our hive. We've been back and forth with a couple of good friends about the state of things. And when we first came out and set up, we lost one of our queens. And so we've been trying to kind of recover from that ever since. Sarah did a combine a couple of weeks ago, and they're doing very well and actually kind of showing signs of maybe swarming. And so we're trying to kind of be out in front of that. A lot of this is kind of trial by fire, I guess, you know, like.
Right. Well, and if you ask 10 people their opinion, you get 11 answers.
We've had people tell us absolutely no, don't split for at least a year. We've had people go, you should have split right away, and we've had everything in between. So we're rookies and we're enjoying learning. We've just been blessed with a lot of friends and mentors who are very generous with their knowledge. After reaching out to a number of those folks on this front, when it comes to this bee thing, we've concluded that this is probably the best thing for us. We're going to try to split this hive today.
So we have one hive that we believe is queen right, it has a queen in it, and another hive that we are fairly certain does not have a queen. And when we did the combining, most of the bees went into one hive. There are still some bees in the original queenless hive. So we're gonna do a split, and like Ben said, there's some signs of a potential swarm coming. They've got a lot of honey in there. They're building some queen cells, which I'll show you when we come across them, and there's a lot of bees in there and a lot of drones, which are all things we've learned are signs of a coming swarm, but we want to get ahead of that. So a swarm is a really natural sign of a healthy hive. That's what they do naturally when their numbers get big, to keep going, but we want to get ahead of it because we would like to keep our bees, and when they swarm they go live somewhere else, and we don't want that. So my hot beekeeper hubby is building the smoker. Is not as easy as it looks. I am not good at doing the smoker, so I end up doing the bees without using a smoker, but because we're going to rearrange so much today, we really need to have the smoker working, because we might have some angry bees when we start moving things around. So this is the box that does not have a queen in it, and I did a full inspection the other day, so we're not really going to inspect this fully, but Ben hasn't been in these boxes for a while, so he probably would think it was interesting. But as you see, like, that's a completely untouched frame, so he's probably not going to take everything out because it's just not necessary, but it's really interesting to see what the bees are doing. So we're going to take this box off, so all we have left is the foundation, and make this actually the top box for when we do our split. So this is the hive that we believe to be queen right, and the last time we did this, I think that the queen is probably in the top box, but I never actually saw her. So we're gonna try to look really closely for her today so that we can ensure we know where she is when we do the split. So this is the top of the top box, and if you see, the bees are just chilling. They're not super agitated, but the last time I was in here, I feel like she was in this top box. But it's not really loud. They're not really agitated. They're just milling about. So we pulled out the first frame. We're looking for eggs and honey and brood and the queen. So this is a ton of nectar. Can you see all the shiny stuff in the middle? And then we've got some capped honey on the top. I don't see any eggs or any brood in this one. Brood is just baby bees, larvae, capped bees that are growing. Here's a big fat drone right there. So he's using his hive tool to break the frames apart because the bees use, it's called propolis. It's like glue, and it just solders things together, and they put propolis in every crevice, and it makes it really tough. So that, my friends, is a ton of capped honey. Oh, and oh my gosh, a ton of drones. Right in there, you see them? They've got the blacker bodies and the huge eyes. So when you smoke the bees, it makes them gorge on honey, which makes them calm. It also makes them go away from the smoke. So if you smoke the top of the frames, they go down into the hive, which is a good thing. And that allows him to manipulate the top of the frames without squishing as many bees. You see how they all just...
This is, the smoker's going out a little bit, but it was enough to get them to scurry down.
And then he can pull the next frame out, because the next frame has got capped brood in it, and we're going to do a really thorough look for the queen. So this is a frame with some brood on it. So this is all capped honey, and this is all capped brood, and it's worker brood. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this as I get closer, but in these cells, so like right here is larva that's getting ready to be capped, and right next to it is larva that's a little bit smaller. And I don't know if you can see that or not. It's a little easier to see in person than it is. So you've got larva that almost reaches the edge of the cell, and then there's one right there that's it's half capped. So we're looking at these queen cells on the bottom that they're building, and that tells me that these guys are starting to make a new queen. It doesn't look like there's anything in it yet, in any of those three yet, but this would be a good frame for us to use during our split because we got a lot of brood. The worker bees cannot lay a queen, but if they have good healthy brood, they can feed it and turn it into a queen. They feed it something called royal jelly, which is such a funny,
Nom, nom.
So I was just in here the other day before doing an inspection, and I knocked all of the excess honeycomb on there. So this comb that they've got hanging off the bottom of this frame is 2 days old. When they get on a task, they work. So this is a whole frame of nectar that is being turned into honey. The use of their wings fans it and it helps the water evaporate from the nectar, and that's part of the process of turning it into honey. Honey and spider silk are two things that humans have not been able to figure out how to replicate. And to me, that's just such a cool God thing. So we want them to focus their efforts on the frame. It just makes inspections easier. So we're just pulling off this excess comb, which is super soft and the kids like to chew on. We got some with honey in it the last time, which was super yummy. So he's just putting it in and sliding it over so that we make room to pull out the next one, because we don't want to put it on the ground just in case the queen was on there and we missed it. This is one of my favorite parts of our property that I actually don't spend a lot of time in, which is part of why we put the bees up here. So the house is, where's the house? We can't even see the house. The house is through these trees right here. And this is just an open green area on the side of our front yard. The road is up behind the camera, and we're up with the bees. This was just a place where the sun comes up between the trees. There's an opening here. The grass grows really well here, so we knew that the sun hit this area and the bees could have the warmth, especially through the winter. And it's not a high traffic area, so we weren't going to have a lot of people walking through and encountering the bees while they were just playing. But it's just such a quiet and peaceful part of the yard that just doesn't get enough attention, I think. So we're moving that box over to this, actually where it was to begin with. We did not find the queen in this box. We did find some good worker brood. So now we're getting into the second box down. This would be the middle box. And we're still looking for the queen. and looking to make sure that this has enough healthy brood and honey to stay by itself for our split. We don't want to take all of the brood and honey over to the new hive when we do the split. We want to make sure we leave some here too, so we don't hamstring these bees.
One of the things that we have both heard people talk about and seen footage of is that once a hive is queenless, once they're separated from their queen, they know immediately and they respond, and you can hear a change in the sound of the humming coming from that area. It sounds like it's not always the case, and since I took that other box off, there's no change at all in this group. So maybe I'm finding reasons to be optimistic, but right now I'm optimistic that she's in here because they're not responding as though she's missing. This is the second frame in on that, the second box down, and it's just a ton of honey. It's not capped on this side, but if you look at this side, look at all that capped honey.
When you can tell by the weight of it just as you're pulling it out. My dad likes to say a pint's a pound the world around except for honey, because it's so heavy. And I like to sneak in and look at the next frame and see what it's going to be. That's full of honey as well.
So sticky.
Oh, look at that beautiful brood. All right, we're gonna find the queen on this frame.
So many drones.
This is what I want to see on a good frame. So this is all worker brood, and I can see because there aren't very many skipped cells, and there's only a couple, like that right there is a drone cell, but the rest of them are pretty flush with the comb. And then around it I can see this orange stuff. It's really hard to see on the camera. Can you tilt the bottom of that towards me a little bit? There, you see how this is orange right here? That's pollen, and this is all capped honey, and it makes kind of a rainbow. So you've got the brood in the middle, then a rainbow of pollen, then a rainbow of honey. Now, the reason we did this before we were finished over there is because the bees were starting to march out of this bottom box, and I didn't want them to just all go back to the other one. So we completed this split essentially, and if we have to open it up and rearrange anything, we will, but we'd like to not have to. So this is 7 frames into that middle box, and this has a lot of drone brood on it. So it's a little more patchy laying, and the capped cells are puffy. They're not flat like they were. Still honey, still larva, but more drone brood on this one. Well, we made it to our last frame of this middle box without finding the queen. And so we're gonna go down into the bottom box. I was hoping to avoid that, but we saw, like I showed you guys, really good brood, lots of drone brood, lots of honey, lots of nectar. I did put my veil up because there were a couple of guardians who were coming out and buzzing around my head, and I just don't like it. It's unsettling to me, so I went ahead and put my veil up. So Ben is pushing the frames back over to their original position because as much as possible, we don't want to rearrange their frames. We want them to have everything exactly the way that they put it. The only exception in this case is we're going to take one more frame of brood out of this one and put it with the blue hive that we split, because they only had one good frame of brood, and we want to give them a second because there was quite a lot of brood in this box. So if you look at these bees on the top here, this is the bottom box. This is a deep box. They do not love these plastic foundation deep frames that we put in with our new box, and all of the bees are concentrated on those frames that were ones that were hand-me-downs.
Sarah was just talking about that they don't like these black plastic foundation frames that we got. And they're clearly the least favorite of the bunch, but it's nice to pull one of them out and see that they're starting to build it up.
So show me the other side of that one. So this is what it looked like when we went in. It's been rubbed with wax, but it's a plastic foundation. And then the other side of it, they've started to build out the cells. So
they've got all this pollen in here, and then this nectar over here.
So one thing we've learned from watching bee videos and talking to our bee Yodas, when we take a box off to continue our inspection, we set it on its side like this versus setting it straight up and down so that the bees don't fall through and fall out onto the ground. I just assumed you'd wanted to keep it straight like it was when it was on the hive, but apparently setting it on its side like this is the better way to do it. So the activity, I think they're getting a little tired of us being in here. We're in our last box. We're about halfway through our last box. Mr. Kroger got stung.
I tried to teach our viewers some new words, but you weren't recording.
Yeah, and I don't know how to bleep out anything yet on YouTube, so maybe it's for the best. But how does a honeybee sting compare to like a yellow jacket or a wasp sting? I mean, because let's face it, it's a sting, it hurts.
Well, I mean, it hurts. This is the third time I've been stung since we've had bees. Sarah hasn't been stung any because she's just better at this than I am.
No, I just wear...
You just wear gloves.
I wear gloves.
I
In
wear
all
gloves.
honesty, I wear gloves. I'd rather not wear gloves.
I have a hard time handling things, like gripping things and telling where things. I like to have full use of my hands.
I'd rather not wear gloves. That's why I don't have any on now, but I'm not handling the bees.
But I got stung twice, and I'll tell you, right at the beginning, it hurts as bad as any other sting, but it doesn't last as long. Like I got stung on my finger, and it's gone. I don't feel it anymore.
It was about, what, 10 minutes ago?
Something like that. And then I got stung on my arm, and it still hurts, but it's faded a lot.
Well, and to give you some perspective, my son got stung on the side of his head, actually, not that long ago, because he was up here uncovered when I was doing an inspection, and it hurt and he cried, and we went down to the house and put some ice on it, and then he was fine. I got stung by a wasp, like a legit nasty black wasp, a couple weeks ago, and it hurt and then itched for like a week. So it's just not as bad. It still hurts, it's still a sting, don't get me wrong. But the honeybees don't really like to sting because it's a fatal exercise when they sting, so they don't like to do that. So we didn't see the queen. I'm pretty bummed about that. Ben is putting the frames back in order, so he's just sliding them back across. He's a better man than I. I'm not sure after getting stung I would want them crawling over my fingers like that. But they really are pretty fun to watch. And I think that's why it's such a surprise when you get stung, because they're just not... aggressive.
They get really moody if you pinch them. Like if I were to pinch these guys between my fingers right now, I'd probably get stung again. But I'm not freaking out. They're checking things out. I had 6 on me, and now I got 3, you know. They check it out, and then they fly off.
You also have propolis and everything all over your fingers.
Yeah.
That sticky bee glue, you've got all over your fingers. So now hopefully we have 2 even hives. We believe the queen is still in this one, but we put some good brood and some queen cells in this one in a split and some bees. So hopefully we've got a good solid split. It's what's called a walkaway split because we're not installing a new queen in here. We're hoping that they will grow one, they will feed one and make one. So I'll come back out in a couple of days to make sure they've chewed through this paper, but I won't do a full inspection. And then in a week or two, like 10 days to 2 weeks from now, I'll come back and check and start looking for the presence of a new queen. So how was your first inspection?
Well, I really enjoyed it. Like I find this so fascinating anyway. Bees are so cool. They're just so, even just the idea of bees, and like Sarah was saying to me earlier about the fact that spider silk, even like silkworms that produce silk fibers like that they use for clothes, any of those kind of fibers that are produced by little bugs, and honey, and there's just a number of things that are out there that are found in nature that humans haven't been able to figure out how to replicate. Despite all of their study, despite all of their observation, humans can't replicate it. Humans can't figure it out. And so it's just so cool to be right there face to face with something that we can't wrap our heads around somehow. Like it's bigger than our understanding, and that's so cool to be face to face with it.
Even after they put it in there. Like it's not honey yet. Like when they collect the nectar and they put it in there, they still have to, they process it. Honey's a processed food. They have to process it
Naturally processed.
all natural ingredients.
All natural.
But they fan it to evaporate the water. So if you were to harvest your honey at the end and it's not all capped, it's not all honey.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting some nectar too, which is mostly water.
I'm a little disappointed because I really wanted to find the queen. Like there's still plenty of activity, there's plenty of brood, it looks healthy. I'm not super worried. As active as it was, as many bees and as healthy as the activity is, I'm not freaking out. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we really wanted to find her. We really wanted to see the queen. So
well, and we heard that change in volume
mm-hmm.
when we took the first box off. There was no change in sound. There was no change in the behavior of the bees. You got stung. Both times you got stung were in that bottom box.
In the bottom,
after
yeah.
we had taken off that middle box, the second box. So I think she may have been in there.
Yeah.
Now we were in there for a long time because we looked at every single frame and really looked it over to try to make sure we didn't miss anything and to make sure we put the right frames in the right places for the split. But so they could have been just agitated that we were in there for so long. But honestly, they completely changed.
Right.
They got more aggressive, they got louder.
Now,
they got more agitated in that bottom box.
I could definitely hear as we went on, like the sound was different in the bottom box. They were clearly more agitated.
It was
now,
definitely different.
How did that compare to what you heard the other day?
I started getting dive bombed by bees when I was in the second box.
Okay.
And the volume increased when I was in the second box because I think now in hindsight, she was in that top box. Because after I took the top box off, the volume went up, the agitation went up, and I thought it was just because I was in there for too long, but compared to what we heard today, they were peaceful all the way through that second box, and it wasn't until we got to the third box, that bottom box, they got loud and aggressive and started like coming out. Like I put my veil on because they were flying up in my face.
Well, and it's funny,
and that's when you got stung.
Like and I got stung 3 times today, and it's not that bad. It hurts. Okay.
That's not really fair today because I wasn't handling any. I was manning the camera and wasn't actually handling anything.
3 times, all in that bottom box, and it's they're so fascinating. They're so cool to watch, or to see the way that their behavior is distinct from one another, and the one that's protecting its behavior, its temperament is so different from the ones that they're just working.
You can see their jobs when you're watching it because you can see you'll see some of them like with their head in a cell, like cleaning it out or feeding something. And I loved watching the ones that were like checking on the larva. Mm-hmm. They'd climb over the larva cells and poke their head in and check on it, and then just keep moving on to the next one. It was so cool to see all the jobs that they were doing. And then obviously the ones that had pollen on them, and there were ones that were doing their honey dance. And
there was one that was doing this cool, like almost like riding a bicycle. It was just cool to watch. It's just one of those things. And I got a couple of stings that smart a little bit, but
that first one in your finger, does it even hurt anymore?
No, my finger doesn't. My arm still does. I think it got me pretty good in the arm, but oh well. Like it's part of the learning process. We're still young at this, and we're still learning.
Say that again.
We're still young. We're still young. And inexperienced at this particular thing, but very young.
Young.
And it's cool. Like Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, before he was Pope Benedict XVI, made this great observation of the intelligibility of life, and that one of the things that tells us we have a creator is that we sort of presuppose this understandability. That there's a fundamental organization. There's a
that it's
fundamental,
not random.
That it's not random. That it's not just some jumble of stuff. That there are building blocks. That there are ways that this life is structured that are incredibly complex, but incredibly well organized. And that organization speaks to some force doing the organizing. This is not like intelligent design. This is far more fundamental than that. It's this fundamental intelligibility of creation that we can look at it and see an organization, and that organization points to some sort of thought that went into the way that life is set up. And that is what gives rise to the great Christian tradition of inquiry. That so many of our greatest scientific discoveries came from a place of wanting to study what was created, of awe at God's creation and a desire to dig into it. It's in vogue to talk about this monumental conflict between religion and science, and it's bunk. It's so not true. So much of our inquiry is born out of, one, an understanding that creation is not God, and the second is it was created by God, and it was thought into existence and organized by God. And when I look at these bees, and I look at their different jobs, and I look at the tessellating hexagonal pattern of their comb, like, it's so cool.
And it's not random. I mean, if you
No.
look at it, one cell to the next, you can notice differences, and each cell has a different purpose based on its contents, but it's a uniform shape and pattern regardless of which bee makes it, regardless of which hive you're in. There's consistency throughout.
Well, that's the answer to your question. How was my first inspection? I got stung 3 times, and it kept me humble, and I didn't find a queen, and it kept me humble, but I walked away having learned a lot, having a kind of a renewed awe of God's creation and just how incredible it is. So thanks a lot, guys.
And we'll catch you on the next video. If you haven't already, drop us a comment, give us a like or a thumbs up, and hit that subscribe button. We would love to share more of our homestead life with you.